Hi everyone, this is Ray, or some of you might know me as Tiki With Ray, and today I'm with my friend Steven.
Hello, Internet.
Steven has a podcast, and what is it called?
The Bonebat Show.
The Bonebat Show, and what is the Bonebat Show about?
It is a comedy and pop culture podcast based here in Seattle that features independent music.
And the reason why I have Steven on the show today, and the reason why I want to do this episode, is, I'll be honest, starting this whole Tiki With Ray thing literally changed my life. It created a new chapter in my life that I would have never seen coming. And it started with blogging, which changed my life as it was. And I started that in 2016. And then I started to do my YouTube show at the end of 2017. And it just took things to a completely different level. And as things have gone on, I just think to myself, it's like, this is the best thing I've ever done in my life. I mean, in my entire life. I play guitar. I mean, maybe being a musician, nothing compares to that. But in my adult life, and as I'm getting older, nothing compares to being a content creator. Mm-hmm. And I make a YouTube show, Tiki With Ray, and you have a podcast.
That's right.
But what made you decide to start podcasting?
Well, my co-host Gordon and I live far away from each other. He lives in Central California. I live in the Seattle area. And we had reached a point where, we wanted to do something together. We weren't chatting that often. And we started playing video games like one night a week. Yeah. And so we'd be playing Halo or StarCraft or whatever. And we'd be insulting each other and just talking about each other's lives. And at one point, one of us said to the other, I wonder if anybody would be ever interested in listening to this. Because we were cracking ourselves up. Yeah. And so, was it a worthwhile type of entertainment? And so not long after that, Kevin Smith's Smodcast came out.
Oh, yeah.
And I heard that, and I'm a bit of an amateur musician, so I had recording equipment. Mm-hmm. And so hearing Smodcast is like, well, we can do that, what he's doing. It's friends getting together and talking.
Yep.
And so in 2007, we started the Bonebat Show. Like, as you mentioned, it opens up other opportunities in your life. And so about 3 years into it, we would have people coming to us and saying, hey, I've got a film I'd like to promote. Yeah. Can we come on your show? Would you be interested in interviewing this director, this actress? Yeah. And so, we started doing that, and we realized that we had access to films. And then one of our friends, Drunken Zombie Podcast, rest in peace, from Peoria, Illinois, they started a film festival. And once again, we were like, hey, if they can do it, we can do that too. But we would want to make it our own style. So independent music is a huge part of what we do. Yep. We want to promote the things we love, be it films or music. We're huge music fans. And so we wanted to have an opportunity to bring that into the film festival. So our festival, the Bonebat Comedy of Horrors, each year we usually play a couple of features, a bunch of shorts from around the world, and then we have a live musical guest.
Now that you mentioned Kevin Smith with the Smodcast podcast, that he was a big influence on me.
Sure.
And what I loved about his podcast, because it was him and Scott Mosier. And I think eventually they got to a point where they'd have guests on. But the bulk of the podcasts were just him and Scott talking to each other. And I always loved that, because I'm sure you've noticed this. When there's two different types of episodes they end up doing. One where you're talking about a topic. Mm-hmm. And then we discuss the topic.
Right.
Hey, what do you think of this, Steven? I don't know. What do you think, Steven? And we talk about things. And then there's the interview. Mm-hmm. So say you're going to have someone that you're going to interview. Well, then you're feeding them questions.
Right.
Which is a completely different interview, a podcast or an episode where then you're just talking about a topic.
Yes, I would say so. Sure.
Did you ever listen to the Nerdist podcast?
Yeah, absolutely.
I always loved that it was the three guys, and they'd have their own shows, their own episodes. I think it was called Hostfuls.
Right.
They'd have guests, but they'd have other ones where it was literally just those three talking. Mm-hmm. And I've always tended to like those better because when they'd have a guest on, they'd have to ask the guest the questions that they'd have to ask the guest.
Right, because the guest is there too to promote something, presumably. So,
but one thing that I loved about Chris Hardwick is because he was a big influence on me too, was because I'm sure you've seen this where there's things where I've watched interviews where the host would literally feed the questions. So what do you think about this? And the host would go blah 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 blah, and then the person would just feed the next question. And there was never any interjection between coming back. He'd never bounce off anything.
Right.
But what I loved about Chris Hardwick is like the guy would answer the question, and then Chris would interject and give his own opinions on stuff. It was like a conversation as opposed to just someone feeding questions.
Absolutely, and that's why, most often if we're going to interview a band, I like to interview a band that I'm a fan of because I'm familiar enough with their work that I can ask questions that maybe wouldn't just be, hey, how did you get started? Often you do start with that because you want the listener to sort of have the comic book origin story, right? How did you get here where you are now?
Yep.
But then you want to jump ahead to, okay, well, this one piece of music, what were you thinking when you put this together? Here's my interpretation. Am I right about that? And sometimes you'll get some great conversations that way.
That's exactly it. Well, like when I started my YouTube show, I'm like a tiki sponge. Like I'm constantly looking for like anything tiki. Online, I'm looking for articles about tiki, and on YouTube, I'm always searching out anything about tiki. And the thing that I noticed is like a lot of the things that I would find on YouTube would be a new tiki bar would open up in some city. So then the local news station would send their guy or their gal down to the tiki bar, like to see what's going on, and like, hi, I'm here at the new tiki bar, and blah 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 blah, and you're kind of like, yeah, I've seen this before. Or if anyone makes a video about tiki, it's like Tiki 101 every time. Well, back in 1933, there was a guy named Don
Ernest
Bonebat, otherwise known as Don the Beachcomber. And you're like, and then Victor Bergeron came and started off at Hinky Dinks and then turned, and you're like, yeah, I've heard that story a million times. And then there's always been there's cocktail blogs, and there's videos about people making cocktails. And I don't know about you, Steven, but I always found those to be boring. I don't need you to show me how to make a cocktail. I can read a recipe. And I've always been about the culture. Everything about tiki as opposed to just the cocktails.
Yeah.
So when I started my show, we're here in Seattle. And, the heart of tiki is obviously down in California. And I knew that, like, there's only so many people that I'm going to be able to, like, interview up here. Unless I travel.
Right.
And I thought, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. My guests will be my friends. And I'll have my friends come on, and then we'll pick a topic. I have a list of different topics. And we'll talk about that topic. So the episode isn't about a particular person, it isn't the guest, the show is about the topic. And it doesn't matter who my guest is. And then that was the plan for my show, because I wanted to create the show that I was looking for.
Right.
I want to get past the Tiki 101. I want to get down to the nitty-gritty of different things,
Balls deep in tiki, if you will.
Balls deep in tiki, yeah. Hey gang, we'll get back to the tiki conversation here in just a second, but I want to let y'all know they have t-shirts for sale. They are screen printed in America. The artist is Tony Canepa, and they're going for $20 a piece, $25 including shipping. If you're interested in buying one, go to my website, tikiwithray.com, and then there's a tab that says buy a t-shirt. Click on there and just follow the prompts. So thank you very much. Another thing that Kevin Smith really inspired me to do, which I've been starting to do over the last year, is Kevin Smith started with the Smodcast. And then he went on to create other podcasts.
Right.
Like he has one with
Fat Man on Batman.
Fat Man on Batman. There's Hollywood Babylon. Yeah. There was one where he was doing with his wife. And there's all these different... He created his own network where each show has its own theme.
Right.
And it's funny. I did a blog post on a guy down in Texas has a YouTube show called A Moment of Tiki. Mm-hmm. And he does a lot of like how-to kind of videos, tiki stuff, like how to like burn like bamboo to make it look good or stuff like that. How to build things and he does some cocktail stuff. So I did a blog post on him, and then he was like, he was joking around where he's kind of like, he goes, I'm proud to be spotlighted in the Tiki With Ray network. I don't think that's funny, but it made me think. It's like that's
a great idea. Yeah.
That's not a bad idea,
right?
Because, like with the original Tiki With Ray series, I think I'm literally up, and I'm in the hundreds. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there is only so many topics you can talk about.
Right. And then you've got Tiki Mugs with Ray.
Well, that started with that. I'm like, I got to a point where I'm like, well, I already did an episode on mugs, but then I have my friend Eric who has so many Tiki mugs where I'm like, I could just do a series with you on your mugs. Mm-hmm. And that's how that started. And I'm like, oh, I could do a series on Tiki mugs, And then...
And now you've got this new Tiki Goth Club, right?
Yeah, well,
this new series.
Well, it started with my friend Jamie, and she started... She's into goth and Tiki, and she started a Facebook group. I think it's called Goth Tiki. And I'm like, that's a good idea. Mm-hmm. And I've had Jamie on my show many times. I'm like, I want to do something. I want to... Because that'd be great, So I started the Tiki Goth Club. Then I'm friends with Heather and Ken Pleasant. Mm-hmm. They live up in Cedar Willie, which is about an hour and a half away from here. Heather's grandfather is Mr. Westenhaver, the guy who started Wicco. So I've done a couple episodes with her and her husband about Wicco. I'm like, there's a show here. There's a series here. Mm-hmm. So Wicco with Ray. And then I interviewed a friend of mine, a guy named Paul. Mm-hmm. He lives over in... like west of here, and like he has all these shag prints, and I'm like, oh my god, there's a show here.
Yeah,
Shag with Ray. I'm at a point now where like I want to branch out from the Tiki thing, so I'm doing a lot of things that I'd like to consider Tiki adjacent, and just to expand my horizons. Is that so? You said you started your podcast 13 years ago. Mm-hmm. So where did it start, and where would you say it is now? And where's it going to go?
No, I'm not sure where it's going to go, honestly. I mean, this year has been an interesting year where things have sort of changed how we look at things. In some ways, it's been a very fertile time for independent music because a lot of people were sort of forced to stay home from touring, which isn't great for musicians' bottom line. It's been hard times for musicians, but they've had a lot of downtime to work on music. So people are coming out with music left and right, which is great for us. It's going to give us stuff to help promote for the next 6 months or a year. But it's hard to tell where the podcast will go. Right now it's sort of in a groove. Like we have a certain style, as you mentioned. You have shows that are topic-based and shows that are, more an interview style. We sort of have a regular thing that we do. Every episode we talk about what pisses us off. We interview an artist, and then we have multimedia triage, which is where we talk about the things that we love. Occasionally we'll do a topic, but most of the time it follows that format.
Do you play guitar too, and you've been in bands and stuff like that. I don't know how it is for you, but how it is for me is sort of like I've been playing guitar since I've been 13 years old, and I played in a lot of bands, and I played a lot of places, and I've done a lot of things musically. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've never made it big or anything like that, but I've done some pretty cool stuff. But what I've noticed is like I like making YouTube shows. I like being a content creator because I like using my creativity to do this now. Mm-hmm. More so than making music. Well, you have your podcast. Do you feel the same way? Or do you still... Or do you see... Or if you're going to use your creativity, is it going to be used to, like, still do music?
Yeah, I think that... I have a lot of things that I get excited about.
Yeah.
And so I think it's all just different sort of channels I plug into at different times. So, I mean, we do the Bonebat show, we do it about once a month.
Yeah.
So that gives me, 3 weeks out of the month to work on other things. And sometimes that's music with social media. I'm part of a covers band.
Yeah.
And sometimes that will be working on the film festival, the Comedy of Horrors. So, there's always more fun stuff to do than there is time in the day, I think, as far as my world is concerned.
You have a family.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can't neglect that at all.
No. And here's the thing. So I'm 49 years old. And when I got into my 40s is when I realized that I don't want to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I might have been more on the fence about it or been open to it when I was in my 30s.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got into my 40s, it was like, no, I don't want to have children.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the thing that I realized. Everyone needs a purpose in life. Mm-hmm. You got to have a reason for living. And for most people, that's their family.
Mm-hmm.
You have a family. You raise your kids. Your purpose for living is to raise your kids. But if you decide that you don't want to have children, that you still need to have your purpose.
Sure, you got to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning.
You still got to have your reason to live.
It may not necessarily be work.
No,
So
to me, like a job. To me, your career is your career, and that shouldn't be your life.
Right. Unless you're lucky enough to, have a job in something that you're
I feel like a porn
utterly passionate about.
If you're a porn star, well, that'd be all right then. I love my job, but I realized that I still needed to have a purpose in life, a reason for living, or whatever you want to call it, and that's how I look at my whole Tiki with Ray thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've made this my life, and I let it take over my life, and I love it.
That's great.
Yeah, but the main thing that I love about doing this is that it's there's so many different variables that are involved when making a YouTube show, or even like with a podcast. Well, you're the host of your show, right?
Co-host, yeah.
Co-host. So but you're not leading the thing, right? It's just you're both talking.
Yeah, we're both talking.
Okay, well, for me, obviously, I'm the host of my show and I have my guests.
Right.
So there's what I love about making YouTube videos is that, and this is the reason why I honestly think that anyone should start a YouTube show or a podcast. Well, first of all, it gives you a purpose in life, if you need one. Mm-hmm. And it's beyond the hobby. Mm-hmm. But what I love about it right off the bat is like if you start doing, well, like say you're doing podcasting, it's pretty easy because there's no video, mm-hmm. so that equation's out. But you still have the audio.
Yes. So you've got to record audio, make it sound good.
And that's one thing in and of itself. Learning how to make a good sounding podcast.
Yeah.
Learning
how to microphone.
Learning how to microphone, recording equipment.
Right.
But more importantly, you got to learn editing.
Editing, absolutely.
You got to learn when to when should I cut this? When should I not cut this? You kind of have to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, okay, well, I may find this funny or interesting, but is my audience going to find this interesting?
Yeah, everybody who's ever recorded anything will have an aside for 5 minutes that goes nowhere. And you have to make that fateful decision. Okay, am I cutting this?
Well, this is the thing that
Do I cut the whole thing? Or is there a joke 2 minutes in that I want to keep and then cut away there? Those are the sort of creative decisions that you make. And then it is definitely a different sort of creative outlet than just the recording or the planning of the show itself.
Well, you got to plan that. You got to think about it. Like, well, what's going to stick, what's not. But I'll tell you what. Well, the thing about a podcast is a podcast can be any length of time. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen podcasts that are 20 minutes. I've seen podcasts like Joe Rogan's that goes on for 3 hours. There's no baseline.
Right.
But there is a baseline when it comes to YouTube videos, which is 15 to 20 minutes max. If you're going, you're really actually more like 15's kind of pushing it.
Yeah.
So when you're making a YouTube video, because obviously if someone's listening to a podcast, it's usually they're in their car, they're driving,
they're at work,
they're
doing
working
some
out.
spreadsheet stuff, working out.
But if someone's watching a YouTube show, they only got so much attention span.
Right.
So making a YouTube video forces me to cut out the fat. Because there are times where I've gone on tangents with my friends, like, oh, I find this interesting. But this has anything to do with the topic at hand. So then I'll cut it. I like making the YouTube video. Well, the thing that I love about YouTube videos is that I got to learn to be a good host. So it has improved my conversational skills, even just talking. But the main thing is to learn how to listen and shut up and let the other person talk. And let the other person finish their statement before I blabber in. So it's learned to make me like, okay, to ask interesting questions. To get past the 101 questions and get into the nitty gritty.
Right.
So I think it's made me a better conversationalist. And then you learn editing, obviously. The audio is the same, but then there's video editing too.
Right.
So the thing is, not only do I got to worry about audio, I got to worry about lighting, my camera, my picture quality. So like, where do I put the camera? What kind of camera do I use? How do I use lighting? What do I do with the lighting? I mean, I start literally with like clip-on lights from Walmart.
Sure.
And now I have soft boxes, and I think if you go through my videos, I don't think they've ever looked bad, but they've definitely looked a lot better now.
It's the learning curve on any of these type of projects.
That's what I love about
the first episodes of the Bonebat show. Like, you can tell we didn't know what we were doing, even talking to each other. To your point, and knowing how to let the other person finish something because you've edited it enough to know what people's cadences are. And I think it's much easier, I've found, when it's Gordon and I chatting. I can edit that super fast.
Yep.
If I'm editing somebody that I've never spoken to before, much harder, because you just don't know their speech style.
Yep.
But we've worked together so long now, Gordon and I sort of have cut, boom.
Yeah, and that's all this stuff that makes me love being a content creator. So what I also love about it, and what I think why someone should start a YouTube show or a podcast is, like, say you have an interest or a topic, right? You quickly go past the 101 of whatever the topic is. And then you can get into the nitty gritty. You can start talking about, like, let's get into the meat and potatoes of these different topics. And you start talking about things and coming up with ideas that you never thought of.
Right. Well, on that point, I think when you talk about why someone would think about starting a YouTube show or a show of any type of podcast, whatever, is that what you can bring to the table is your personality and your perspective.
Yes.
Nobody else has that. That is the one thing that only you can do. And so by giving yourself sort of that creative outlet, it gives you an opportunity to create something that is completely new and unique that no one has ever seen before. And only you can do that.
Oh my God. Stephen, you're hitting it right on the head. Two people come to my mind when I think of that. Kevin Smith and Anthony Bourdain. Because like Anthony Bourdain, he's always done shows about food. And like, yeah, I love food, but like not like how he does. And what I loved about watching his shows is like, yeah, he's interviewing someone. It's like, I don't care what that person says. I want to see what he says. I want to see how he reacts. I remember if there was like a movie coming out, like say like when the Star Wars movies were coming out, the very first person's opinion I wanted to hear was Kevin Smith's.
Sure.
I want to hear Kevin Smith's perspective on things. So, like, looking at both of those two guys as my muses, it's like that's always been my feeling. I mean, I hope my goal is to be that guy where, like, I want to know what Ray thinks about this stuff. The main thing that I love about doing this whole Tiki with Ray thing is just the fact that I've met so many new people, and now I call them friends.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah. Like yourself. So.
Yeah, I remember when I first, my wife and I got our tiki bar, and we're the type of people that researches everything that we do in our lives, You know, you start Googling things and looking articles up, and who's this Tiki with Ray guy? What? He's in Seattle?
Yeah.
He has a show? And what? He's also into heavy metal? How do I not already know this guy?
Exactly.
We have everything in common, so.
Yeah, there you go. So
there you go, brother.
So I guess when it comes down to it, start a YouTube show or start a podcast to make some new pals.
Yeah, that's right. What about the sexy time Ray After Dark?
That's on that's on Cinemax, and the only way you can watch is if it scrambles. But what I'm realizing
that's behind a paywall, folks.
Yeah, but
if you know what I mean, and I think you do.
Yeah, you don't want to pay.